Right here we see the way in which there's a kind of inequality of measurement going on. We find among the atheist writers an attempt to blame religion not only for its own crimes, but also the crimes of atheism. Sam Harris, in his book, The End of Faith, says the following. He's trying to prove that suicide bombing is entirely religious. But he knows that the inventors of suicide bombing in the modern form are the Tamil Tigers, who are fighting over land and are fighting over self-determination. So he says this: while the motivations of the Tamil Tigers are not explicitly religious, they are Hindus who undoubtedly believe many improbable things about the nature of life and death. The cult of martyr worship that they have nurtured for decades has many of the features of religiosity that one would expect in people who give their lives for a cause. So the Tamil Tigers see themselves as secular combatants in a political struggle. But Sam Harris detects a religious motive because these guys are Hindus, and surely there's some underlying religious craziness that explains what they're doing. Now we turn to Christopher Hitchens. I want to read, if I may, a line from Daniel Dennett in his book, Breaking the Spell. He says this. He says, "It is true that religious fanatics are rarely, if ever, guided by the deepest and best tenets in those religions. So what? Al-Qaeda and Hamas terrorism is still Islam's responsibility, and abortion clinic bombing is still Christianity's responsibility." Here's what he's saying. If bad guys do bad things in the name of an ideology, the ideology doesn't get to shake them off and say, those guys were just perversions. You have to take responsibility. And the point I'm making here is, Christopher Hitchens will not take responsibility as an atheist for the crimes committed in the name of atheism. He is doing backward somersaults to blame the Christians for them. So Christianity has a lot to answer for. We wouldn't need repentance if that wasn't the case. But Christians should not have to answer for Mao and Stalin.
Do we have some shy students? Here we go. And please address your question either to Dinesh or to Christopher, but I will not at all be shocked if the other person then jumps in.
Mr. Hitchens, you mentioned that having a simultaneous love and fear of someone is no way to teach morals. Now, I don't know about your upbringing, but how do you propose that we teach any self-respecting, say, 2-year-old morals?
2-year-old?
Or should we wait until they've developed a good sense of self-respect for themselves to learn morals on their own?
I've actually seen 2-year-olds undergoing some of these dilemmas. In fact, it's an unbelievably vivid memory. It's not nice to think that your children must be evil or innately wicked. But there is a point where reason does enter. It's just a bit later than 2. You can't terrify them into doing it. You can sometimes bribe them into doing it by saying Santa Claus knows what they're doing. It has an almost magical effect. But even as you do a thing like that, you feel slightly cheap. In other words, this is going to be a problem for us, whether we are people of faith or not.
But Christopher, isn't it true that in childhood, all learning is based on piety? And by that I mean, even if you were to teach somebody the law of gravity as a child, you would teach it to them to be received on faith. Later, they would subject it to critical scrutiny.
I dare say I'm not going to disagree with you that the observable laws of gravity
so why do you
are not repudiated by any responsible parent. But perhaps, I don't know if either of you have noticed this, but you seem to regard, it's a revealing disclosure, of the role of religion to treat us as if we were infants.
I said that when we are infants.
That was my objection to it in the first place.
Boo. I didn't say if we were infants, I said when we are infants. Look, I think there's a deeper point here. The atheists have kind of expected that as countries become more modern, more technological, religion would wither away. They figured out it's not going to happen. And so they've decided to focus on the schools. And so you find common themes in Dawkins's book, Harris's book, Hitchens' book. Why do parents have the right to inculcate religious values in the young? Shouldn't that be something that is taken over by the schools and done, you may say, in an atheist way? Or at least the schools are seen as deprogramming the religious beliefs that parents inculcate into children. I think that this is a little worrisome in a free society, the desire to detach children from the moral training of their parents, to turn it over to experts like Dawkins and Hitchens, whom I think you can see are not merely following the evidence where it leads, but have a certain visceral dislike, have themselves an agenda no less fierce than that of any Christian parent.
This is a question for Mr. D'Souza. It's a statement you made earlier that the laws of nature reflect the goings-on in our head. I'd love to hear you elaborate on that a little bit more.
The point I was getting at is this. When I said earlier that the laws of nature, the universe is lawful, we only have to go to other cultures to see how odd that is. The Muslim writer Al-Ghazali says, how can the universe obey, how can matter obey laws? He says the universe is a reflection in the mind of Allah. Everything happens because Allah intervenes every single nanosecond to make it happen. Now that's not the belief of Christianity. Now, if you imagine that in our heads are atoms and molecules and neurons firing away, I ask you, what logical necessity is there for the workings of these neurons in here to match the laws of the universe out there? Why should there be a correspondence between the two? Again, as a theist, I have an answer. As an atheist, he has a guess. And in fact, he's been hanging an awful lot on that guess tonight. The reason, I'm not defending this or that miracle, but I'm simply saying that we have a very limited understanding of
You haven't
nature's
defended any
laws.
miracles, as a matter of fact.
I'm sorry?
You haven't defended any miracles, as a matter of fact.
Well, in my book, as you know, I defend one, the resurrection. I lay out the evidence for it in a very much in an historical way. But that was my point, that there's a strange correspondence here that ultimately relies on faith. And the only difference ultimately with the atheist is he relies on the evidence while denying the metaphysical ground on which it stands. Isn't that true?
Metaphysical drama is a bit strong, I think. It's whole cloth fabrication.
Isn't science based on metaphysical assumptions?
I still think you misrepresented, David. If you see something apparently involving suspension of the laws of nature, shall we say, the sun standing still so Joshua can win his battle, all right? Or the raising of Jairus' daughter, or even my favorite miracle, the turning of the water into wine at Cana. A tribute to the Hellenistic influence that still persisted in Palestine at that time. You still have to ask yourself the question, which is more probable, that the laws of physics or nature have been suspended, by the way, in my favor, or that I'm under a misapprehension? Everyone has to ask themselves that question. That's if they saw it themselves. If they take it as a report issued through and filtered through dozens of other non-eyewitnesses and corrupt texts down the years, then I would think anyone who says that they think of the resurrection as a historic fact is advertising a willingness to believe in absolutely anything.
Let's have another question.
This question is for Mr. Christopher Hitchens. You've said in past debates, and I refer to the debate between you and Doug Wilson, that morality has merely evolved. And I say merely because I think we'd all agree, Christian and atheist alike, that morality has evolved anthropologically speaking. But I want to know, if it's merely evolved, why can't I transcend the current state of evolved morality? What standard can you appeal to?
Well, look, evolved morality is because we're an evolved species, and because of our evolution, the lowly stamp of which, as Darwin so beautifully puts it, we bear, the fact that we are primates, an unarguable fact. Our prefrontal lobes are slightly too small. Our adrenal gland, though there's evidence that they're still evolving, which is, I think, heartening. You may have to be patient.